Welcome back. I've been speaking with Professor Barry Eichengreen, the Distinguished Professor of Economics at University of California at Berkeley. Professor Eichengreen, thank you very much for your patience. Before we went to the break, you referred to the India growth story, saying that it is sound. There is a lot of bonhomie, a lot of cheer about the India story. Do you think the economy can grow sustainably at 7% or thereabouts?
I think 7% is ambitious. It's a target worth pursuing. I would guess something closer to 6% over the next decade or so. The infrastructure push is a good thing from the point of view of Indian growth, and eventually it will be a good thing from the point of attracting foreign direct investment. India will benefit from friendshoring. In other words, we've already seen Apple move some of its iPhone assembly from China to India, and with better infrastructure, I think we can see more such movement by other companies. The wild card is new technology. I wonder whether artificial intelligence, generative AI, is good or bad for the Indian economy. In other words, AI is going to be able to do a lot of the high-tech things that are currently being done in India, including coding and a variety of other high-tech services. So whether the Indian economy will be able to capitalize on those new technologies or not, as I said, I think is a wild card.
Okay. Yes, that remains one of the most debated issues in India. Whether it's going to make us better off or worse off in the sense of taking away some jobs. But that debate for another day. There is another issue about growth which is often spoken about, and that's what we call the K-shaped recovery. Clearly, it's premium products in every category that's doing well, and mass consumption appears to be not growing to the same extent. Maybe the skew is there in other countries, but in India itself, can that be an obstacle to growth, or can we grow in spite of being a two-speed economy?
No, I think India needs to even out the hills and valleys in its growth story. It needs to grow agriculture, manufacturing, and services. It needs to bring the lagging states up to speed. It needs to deal with the fiscal problems of the profligate states. So I think that, as your viewers will know, the growth story here has been uneven, and keeping it going at 6 or 7% will require bringing the laggards, whether we're talking about states or sectors, up to speed.
Okay, yeah, that would remain perhaps an issue of politically driven transfers of income. But to come to another issue, I have more questions on India, but how do you assess the China position, Professor Eichengreen? The Chinese growth story clearly looked wobbly in the second quarter after reasonable growth in the first quarter. Does it look like we're going to see a sustained period of slow growth in China, or do you see it coming back to perhaps an average 5% or more?
I think China is still enough of a planned economy, and the authorities have enough policy levers to prevent a very serious growth slowdown from being sustained. So I would expect the economy to come back. It's not going to grow again at 6%, but something on the order of 5% for several years going forward, I think is realistic, and the authorities will use monetary and fiscal policies and their control of the 4 big banks to ensure that happens. Okay, well, now let me come back to the India story. More from the currency angle. There has been a lot of dissatisfaction, especially after the United States de-recognized the Russian reserves. A bit of a fear if all reserves have to be kept in US dollars. There's been a flight to gold in some central banks. Do you see the dollar position getting threatened at all as an international medium of exchange or as a reserve currency? Only at the margins. So the relative importance of the dollar as the dominant global currency had been declining very slightly over time already, in my view, for a couple of decades. And I think that evolution will continue, that as we move toward a more multipolar global economy, we'll also move toward a more multipolar global monetary system where the dollar is less dominant. But sanctions are not going to accelerate that process dramatically because there are not a lot of places to turn. The other attractive currencies besides the Chinese renminbi, their issuers are all on board with the sanctions against Russia. Gold is an awkward unit to hold as reserves and do transactions in. There is no alternative to continuing to hold and use dollars. So I don't expect that to change dramatically in response to recent events.
There's a great deal of interest in India about a little more international role for the rupee. In fact, just this week, an internal group of the Reserve Bank has presented a report on how to make the rupee a slightly more international currency, an evolutionary role. Do you think that role is possible? I mean, there has been a bit of a rupee-ruble trade. The buying of crude from Russia has been without using the dollar for obvious reasons. But is it possible that there can be a bigger role, international role for the rupee, especially if central bank digital currency were to develop?
As the relative importance of the dollar in the global monetary system has declined, what we've seen is a growing role for a variety of other currencies like the Canadian dollar and the Australian dollar, even the South Korean won. So in principle, there is no reason why the rupee couldn't be added to that list. It wouldn't become a dominant global currency, but it could be used more widely in international payments as markets in Indian government bonds and other assets become more liquid and payments become more fluid. But as we say, Rome was not built in a day. It will take years, maybe even decades, for that transition to be completed.
Oh, yes. I guess even the Reserve Bank of India group report is looking for an evolutionary role. But there is that desire to make the rupee a medium of exchange, at least for countries like Sri Lanka, for Middle Eastern countries with which India has a lot of trade. There is, of course, a problem that India runs a deficit with many of these countries, and hence the problem of their accepting the rupee. But to come back to where we began, Professor Eichengreen, when do you expect the Fed to start cutting? Do you think it happens, say, in a year?
If we see a recession at the end of this year or beginning of next year in the United States, the Fed will start cutting. If we avoid any kind of landing and the economy continues to grow, we're going to have to see how inertial core inflation remains. The Fed could pause again, and it could stay on hold for a while into next year.
Okay. All right. Well, that's what a large part of the equity markets are betting on. The risk rally is betting on an early shift, an early pivot, probably a couple of more hikes, as you pointed out, but a cut probably early next year and with some luck later this year itself. Professor Eichengreen, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us your take on the global economy and on the Indian economy as well.
Good to be with you.
Whenever I